Welcome to the Tiefenkenner. Today, we are diving deep into the emotional landscape that many of us never had the tools or words to explore. We are going to talk about reparenting ourselves and what psychologists call the inner child. This journey is not just about looking back. It is about understanding who we are today and how we can heal the emotional wounds that still live inside us. Reparenting is not about blaming our parents or living in the past. It is about giving ourselves the emotional care, the safety, the validation, and the guidance we may have never received when we needed it the most. Let us begin by exploring what psychologists mean when they talk about the inner child. The term inner child refers to a psychological concept that represents the part of our psyche that still holds on to the feelings, memories, and experiences we had when we were children. Even though we grow up physically and intellectually, parts of our emotional world often remain frozen in time, especially if we experience trauma, neglect, or emotional invalidation. Imagine a child sitting alone in a room, afraid to speak, afraid to be seen, or desperately seeking approval. That child does not disappear when we grow older. Instead, they live quietly within us, influencing how we feel, how we react, and how we relate to others. The inner child can show up in our lives in many ways. We might feel irrational fear in relationships, anxiety in moments of uncertainty, or overwhelming shame when we make mistakes. These are not just random emotions, they are echoes of emotional experiences we had when we were young. Now, here is where reparenting comes in. Reparenting is the conscious act of becoming the caregiver to your inner child that you never had. It means learning to speak to yourself with kindness, setting healthy boundaries, giving yourself the love, safety, and emotional presence you once needed but may not have received when you needed it the most. This concept has deep roots in modern psychology. Psychologist John Bradshaw helped bring the idea of the inner child into popular awareness in the late 19th century. He argued that when children grow up in environments where emotional needs are ignored or dismissed, they internalize the belief that their feelings are wrong or unimportant. These beliefs become unconscious patterns that shape our adult lives. Psychologist Alice Miller, who studied the effects of childhood trauma, also spoke about the silent suffering of children who were forced to suppress their emotions in order to survive emotionally. She argued that this kind of emotional repression leads to depression, anxiety, perfectionism, and many other psychological symptoms in adulthood. When we start reparenting, we do not just heal the past, we begin changing the present. Instead of reacting to the world as that wounded child, we begin to respond as a conscious adult who understands where those wounds came from and how to nurture them with compassion. This is not an easy process. It requires awareness, honesty, and a willingness to feel things we may have buried long ago. But it is one of the most powerful paths to self-transformation and emotional resilience. So, how do we begin? How do we actually reparent ourselves? It starts with listening. Pay attention to the moments when you feel triggered, when you feel small, ashamed, or afraid. Instead of judging yourself, ask this simple question. What is my inner child feeling right now? When you start asking that question, you begin to uncover the emotional roots of your reactions. Maybe you feel unworthy because someone criticized you. Maybe you feel abandoned when someone cancels plans. These feelings often have little to do with the current situation and everything to do with how you were once made to feel as a child. The next step is offering yourself what you needed back then. This could be reassurance. You are safe now. This could be validation. Your feelings make sense. It could be permission. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to ask for help. At first, this may feel awkward, even unnatural. But with practice, it becomes a new way of relating to yourself. A new voice emerges inside you, one that is nurturing, patient, and strong. This is the voice of the inner parent. It does not erase the pain of the past, but it brings healing by offering what was missing. This kind of self-care is not selfish. It is essential, because the way we treat ourselves becomes the blueprint for how we relate to others. When we learn to care for our inner child, we show up in our relationships with more compassion, more patience, and more authenticity. We no longer need others to fix us or validate us. We become responsible for our own emotional world. We grow up not just in age, but in wisdom and presence. Reparenting does not mean pretending that nothing happened. It does not mean making excuses for those who hurt us. It means holding space for the truth. Many people carry a deep fear that if they begin to feel their childhood pain, they will drown in it. But the truth is, this pain already lives inside us. It affects our relationships, our confidence, our ability to trust. By facing it, we do not make it worse. We set it free. Let us talk for a moment about the different kinds of inner children we might carry. There is the abandoned child. This part of us felt neglected or forgotten, often emotionally, if not physically. This inner child may show up in adulthood with deep fear of rejection or a constant need for approval. Then there is the fearful child. This one grew up in a home where anger or chaos was common. This inner child often becomes hyper-vigilant as an adult, always waiting for something to go wrong. There is also the guilty child. This one was blamed for things they did not do, or made to feel responsible for the emotions of others. They often grow up feeling like they must constantly please others, or that their needs are a burden. And then there is the playful, joyful child. This part of us is spontaneous, creative, and curious, but often repressed if our environment discouraged self-expression. Reparenting is about welcoming all these parts, not just healing the wounded child, but also reconnecting with the joyful one. When we were young, our brains were developing rapidly. We needed stable, nurturing caregivers to help us regulate our emotions and make sense of our experiences. If we were not given that support, then our nervous system learned to cope in other ways. We may have learned to shut down, to please others, to hide our true feelings. These patterns are survival mechanisms, and they are not our fault. But as adults, we have the power to choose differently. Let us now talk about what it looks like in practice to reparent yourself. Start by developing self-awareness. Pay attention to your emotional triggers. Notice when you feel disproportionately upset. That moment is often the voice of your inner child calling out. Instead of ignoring it, pause and ask gently, what do you need right now? Give yourself permission to feel without judgment. This might mean journaling or meditating, or simply sitting in silence and breathing with the feeling. Over time, you will begin to distinguish between the voice of the inner child and the voice of your adult self, and you will start to build a bridge between the two. The next step is creating emotional safety. Children need to feel safe in order to grow. That means setting boundaries in your adult life, saying no when you need no, not putting yourself in environments that feel unsafe, choosing relationships that honor your truth. This may be one of the hardest parts of reparenting because it means letting go of toxic dynamics and standing up for yourself in ways you were never taught. But every time you protect your peace, you tell your inner child, I am here now. I will not abandon you. Another key aspect of reparenting is learning to meet your own needs. When we were young, our caregivers were supposed to help us recognize and meet basic emotional needs: the need for affection, the need to be seen, the need to be encouraged. If those needs were unmet, we often looked to others to fulfill them. But reparenting teaches us to give those things to ourselves. This could be as simple as speaking kindly to yourself after a mistake, or making time each day to do something just because it brings you joy. It could mean eating nourishing food, or getting a rest, or spending time in nature. These are not luxuries, they are forms of self-love. They are the building blocks of internal stability. One of the deepest gifts of reparenting is learning how to forgive ourselves. Not because everything we did was right, but because so much of what we did came from pain, confusion, and survival. Many people carry shame for how they acted in relationships, for how they handled stress, for choices they made under emotional pressure. But shame is not a teacher, it is a cage. Reparenting invites us to step outside that cage and into compassion. Ask yourself this: would I speak to a hurting child the way I speak to myself? Would I punish them for being scared or ashamed or tired? Or would I hold them, remind them of their worth, and guide them gently toward healing? You deserve that same compassion. Every time you choose to be kind to yourself instead of critical, you are doing the work of reparenting. Let us now look at how inner child work connects with our nervous system. The nervous system remembers what the mind forgets. If you grew up in an environment of fear, your body still carries that fear. You might experience anxiety even when nothing is wrong. You might freeze or shut down in conflict, not because you are weak, but because that is what your body learned to do to stay safe. Reparenting involves working with your body, not just your thoughts. This can include somatic practices like grounding exercises, breathing techniques, or gentle movement that helps signal to your body that you are safe now. When your inner child feels safe, your whole system begins to regulate. You're no longer living in reaction, but in response. Let us also speak about grief. Grief is a central part of the reparenting journey because when you begin to heal, you must face what was lost, the childhood you did not get, the love you did not receive, the safety that was never there. Grieving that loss is painful, but also liberating. It allows you to stop waiting for someone else to fix it. It lets you mourn and then rebuild, not from fantasy, but from truth. And the truth is, you can become what you needed. You can become the safe presence, the patient guide, the loving voice. You can become your own home. This is not about perfection. You will still have hard days. You will still get triggered or fall into old patterns. But now you know what is happening. And now you have the tools to respond with love. That is the real transformation. Not becoming someone else, but becoming more fully yourself. The reparented self is not afraid of pain. It knows that pain has a message. It knows that emotions are not enemies, but messengers. And it knows that healing is not a straight line. It is a spiral. Sometimes we revisit the same wound again and again, each time with a little more wisdom and a little more grace. Let us pause here and reflect. What would your inner child say to you if they could speak to you today? What would they ask you to see, to remember, to feel? And what would you say back to them now as the adult you are? Speak to that child in your heart. Let them know they are no longer alone. Let them know you are here and you are listening, because that is where healing begins. Not with fixing, but with presence, with staying, with love. It is sacred. It reminds us that life is not only about survival, it is about aliveness. Maybe it is dancing alone in your room. Maybe it is painting, singing, gardening, or storytelling. Whatever it is, find time for it. Because every time you play, you tell your inner child you deserve to feel good. Let us also talk about community. Reparenting is deeply personal, but it does not have to be lonely. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is let ourselves be seen by others. Find people who value emotional growth. People who can hold space for your truth without trying to fix it. Therapy can be part of this journey. Support groups can be too. But even one genuine connection where you feel safe and understood can make a huge difference. Because we heal in relationship, especially when those relationships reflect the love and care we are learning to give ourselves. Lastly, remember this. You are not broken. You are not too late. And you are not the wounded child forever. You are also the adult who survived. The adult who is now choosing to show up with intention and love. That is power. That is transformation. And that is what reparenting is really about. It is not about rewriting the past. It's about rewriting the future. One choice at a time. One breath at a time. One moment of compassion at a time. You are becoming the parent you always needed. And in doing so, you are becoming more fully yourself.